This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So welcome everybody. Excited to see everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Derek Willis. I'm the technical director at Kentucky Youth Soccer. Uh, I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of faces I really don't know, so I'm excited to have all of you guys here. For those who don't know me, and a lot of people who do know me might not know this, I used to be the president of the Kentucky High School Soccer Coaches Association. Seems like forever ago. So I've had my feet in both worlds quite a bit. I also help out at Great Crossing High School here in Georgetown, Kentucky, in my spare time coaching goalkeepers. I do stay in tune with the high school game, and obviously my job mostly revolves around the club game. What we want to do here tonight is kind of just discuss some things, some strategies about how possibly we can, help each other work in our own different worlds, instead of, always kind of being on our own little island. So hopefully we can come to some good ideas. I definitely saw some interesting things in the questionnaire that we had. Ready and excited to be talking about it. Just a reminder for those who just joined us, if you have a question, want to speak, please just enter it into the chat, and then we'll get you guys on and we can talk a little bit. Jeremy Anderson will be helping us out there. But I'm going to have some things where I'm going to have to ask you guys to, get involved into the chat a little bit, as we go, just to kind of get this conversation going here. So, just kind of, the idea of the roundtable is, when I said bridging the gap between high school and club to improve the game. For me, I've always noticed this is that there's always a high school camp, there seems to be a club camp, and then we've got a lot of coaches that do both. A lot they're somewhere in between, which, there's a lot of differences in the game, but obviously there's a lot of similarities as well. And ultimately, the biggest similarity is our players are playing them both, especially in Kentucky. So how do we help those kids and our kids improve in the game? And that's the big thing that I want to really focus on and look at. Some of the issues that I've just noticed, and if you guys have some that you found over the years of what you're doing, please add that into the chat. I've been on a couple of these different calls with different organizations on the past few weeks, and I found a lot of this very interesting. The number one issue and reason why I sent that questionnaire to a lot of you guys was communication. And mostly lack of communication. And we'll get into what that might be, why that is, and look into that. The next one is player ownership. And I think that's a really big piece, is that we always perceive that player who plays for us is our player and only our player, when in fact that player has multiple coaches in a year. I'm a big proponent of that player just happens to be playing for us and we're serving them, not them serving us, if that makes sense. And I think that's where a lot of the friction comes from. It's interesting. I have friends in the game that are strictly high school coaches, and I have friends in the game that are strictly club coaches. And it's always interesting to hear the perception of these coaches and what they do in each, and what their thought processes are. And some of them are very true, some of them are very not true. And that becomes a really big problem. And we'll get into talking this a little bit more. I think sometimes part of the issues in the perception is we just don't appreciate what the other, whether it be high school or club, is giving to that player. I think we have to ask the question, why are our kids playing club, or why are our kids playing high school? There's a definite reason for that. And then we need to figure out what that reason is. And that helps us to figure out how to motivate that player and help them, achieve their best level. One of the biggest things I want to hit on is communication. One of the questions I asked is, first, the club coaches, how often do you communicate with your players, high schools? And the answers was, 60%, frequently no. Some in that 60%, yeah, on occasion, but hardly ever. Some said frequently yes, but what does that mean? Maybe a couple of times here and there. That clearly is a problem, and we'll get into a little bit more details on that. But what I found really interesting was this next slide, was high school coaches. How do you communicate with your club coaches? And of the same number of responses, it's exactly the same percentage. That's kind of fascinating to me, because a lot of times what I like to hear is, well, their high school coach isn't communicating, they won't listen to me, or that club coach, he just he has no interest in talking to me. And what we turn to find out is that actually neither one of you are very interested in talking to the other one. and that's where we're going to get down to the root of. Okay. So real quickly, if you're a club coach, you'll be writing this in the chat box. If you're a high school coach, in the chat box. If you're both, maybe put down both. But in the chat box, if you're a club coach, I want you to put, club, and then put down what's your perceptions of high school. So just a couple of different, things, and vice versa with your high school coaches. Can you put down a couple perceptions you have of just the club game? Just take 10, 15 seconds, type in a couple of things. Jeremy's going to kind of read off a couple of what our answers are going to be. And there, off we go.
So Eric obviously coaches both. Eric, do you want to give us any little insight as to what you see on the club side versus the high school side, having been on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can I think I like the high school programs are kind of a lot like the national teams. They get their players for a short amount of time, and they've got to compete at a high level. So, and they're playing for pride, and they're playing for their community and all that. So it's kind of like, I don't know, and they're like that. And then the club is they have more time with the players usually, and have more time to train them a little bit. But I mean, you can, depending on the high school coach, like I think in the high school program, there can be programs that are doing off-season stuff as well, like to improve their athleticism and all that. So
it seems like everyone we have in the chat seems to do both club and high school. Is there anybody there that is specific to high school or specific to club? All right, Jeremy, what are some of your thoughts with the high school game as opposed to the club players that you get?
One thing that I've noticed is a lot of our connections from club actually come from high school coaches that coach club either in one area of the state or the other. I know George Brown right now has a lot of my girls on his team, and the one perception that I get is not my personal feeling, but I have had seen from area coaches is that high school soccer is represented in the papers throughout the school years, and therefore they're getting their name out that way. But I've always been a firm believer that there's no way to have a successful program at the high school level unless you have players that are playing club and playing year round. And I know some high school coaches have the perspective of that they're all about high school. Whereas if we can transition into both club and high school, it'll definitely elevate the level. It's just getting those area coaches in the state to buy into that fact.
Ben, you took and commented on both club and high school. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you see, I guess with your comments here, what you see on the high school side and the club side as well?
I put down just some opinions I've heard of both, and I coach both, so I try to blend that line where I'm running my high school program like a club, and we're doing off season conditioning. But one of the big things that I see is that the kids do play for more than themselves at the high school level. They play for the passion of the school and their friends that maybe aren't part of it. And I sometimes don't see that as club, where they're playing for them and their team. But at the same time, with club, you have a longer season to develop a style of play, implement a playing philosophy, really develop the kids. Where high school, at least for Ohio, we get them August 1st officially, and the season's over by middle of October, early November. So
Christopher Stern, I like this little comment you've had about high school encouraging kids with their club time and then enjoying high school time. Did you want to elaborate on that a little bit for us? It's an interesting comment there.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll jump in with that because I see a lot of friends on here that I know through high school and club, which is nice to see everybody in here tonight. That balance that we're trying to do, it's not always easy, but we actually say that to our parents going in. We're like, hey, when a parent says to us, well, they expect improvement, I tell them straight up, it's like, hey, we've got your kids for maybe three months. And that's about forming a team during that time period and enjoying the experience that goes along with the high school side of it. And we try and tell them to balance that. So balance a more rounded overall soccer experience through your club that you're going to develop in club and get advanced skills. You're going to get a lot of different experiences, competition, competing for a spot. Because let's be real, a lot of the high schools from on the girls' side, you might not even have numbers. So you might not even have cuts on some of these teams. So there's I think I've always loved to see a balance between the two because it really represents a complete experience for the kids. You get the community passion, like you talked about, from the high school side. You get the travel and the competitiveness and the opportunity for different types of tournaments and things like that from our club. And then you get the experience to possibly play afterwards. We have a lot of kids that balance that they could play in college, or maybe they don't want that. Well, I think I'd just love to see a more balanced approach between them, so they see the soccer as an entire experience. So yeah, we use the word experience a lot in what we do.
Jay, reading through your comments, you've got an interesting one here that said it needs to be asked tonight how high school coaches give their players a platform to gain exposure to clubs. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? What are you suggestions on it maybe, or what are you meaning by that? And I see that you're agreeing with Paul, too many games in high school and such, and that's something we may get to here in a little bit, but
Sure.
what are your thoughts, Jay?
I think right now, I've been at Fairdale High School since 2012. Now I've recently stepped away from there. I'm moving on from that, so I went ahead and put both because I've been doing high school for the last 15 years, pretty much. I think one thing I would have liked to have seen as a high school coach, and I'll be the first to tell you, not a lot of high school coaches are good at responding to emails. I'll be the first to tell you that. I don't think I'll be alone in that sentiment. But for me, I would have loved to, as long as I've been coaching in high school, I would have loved to have seen an email from a club representative saying, hey, if there's any, if you have any players that are interested, if you have any players that you feel like would be good enough to make a club roster, tryouts are at this date. And I don't think we saw enough of those. I really don't. I sometimes wonder if clubs would be well served to have a high school liaison, somebody to come and talk to the high school coaches, in regards to a common player, or to even go to each school and kind of have a mini tryout to see if we have any diamonds in the rough. I just don't think. I think it comes down. I think the important conversation here needs to be about exposure for our kids, and I don't think we're turning over enough stones to find the talent.
Yeah, well, Jay, let's come back to that because I think that's a very valid point, and I think that's something I want to get to towards a little bit further down the line. But great ideas there. Um, so a lot of good ideas on perceptions, as Jeremy was talking
Derek, you're breaking up, man.
through a couple different other uh, quotes uh, and comments. So this can get very lively if we're not careful. But something to think about now, guys, is now that we talked about what the perceptions are. Oh, sorry, mine was not great. um, um, Jeremy, let's also go into possibly the positives of each. Can you hear me?
There, Derek. I think we've lost Derek for a second. Hey, Charlie, if you're on there, could you hop on? Kind of talked about a minute ago. You
Yeah,
asked why club
can you
coaches.
positive of each?
Hey, Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Good. Yeah. So here was sort of my point. I coach high school and club, and when I was on the club side exclusively, I had opinions about high school. Having coached on the high school side before I was a club director, I had opinions on club, of course. But this is one of the interesting things I've seen. When a club coach is coaching high school or a high school coach is coaching club, what I found is they treat the two situations completely different. On one hand, when they come to club, they don't do two-a-days. They don't have kids out there at 5:30 in the morning flipping tires in the parking lot. They don't have kids going for 6-mile runs and all these other things. But when they go to high school, they do. And I'm not exactly sure what changes in the mentality of coaches to do those kinds of things. When you look at the high school season, it's so compressed and it's so short. Once my team's in season, almost every session we run is almost a recovery session. It's like we do all the work in late July and in August to put in style of play and anything else we want to try to get done at high school. And then it's really just work with the pieces that you've got. When we go to club, of course, you got more time with them, so it's a longer term approach. But when you look at the number of kids that get injured, I can't say one's necessarily going to be higher than the other, but you see some of the silly injuries at a high school with hamstrings and things like that because kids, it happened to me last year with my club team. I got 2 kids back to club and both of them went down late season, and it was overuse injuries for the most part. So it's just interesting to me that coaches will go one way on club, but they tend to go another way on high school. And to be fair, I have been criticized relentlessly at my high school for not like doing a preseason running program in high school. But we go with the theory, if we want to work on endurance, we'll play 11v11. If we want to work on interval training, we'll play 7v7. So that's just some of my thoughts on it. I was curious what other people either A, do when they coach both, or B, if this is just a Louisville thing.
Anybody have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll go on that because I've been on both ends of the coaching spectrum, and I think it's going to vary a lot coach to coach. I give kids that are coming off extended club seasons 2 to 3 weeks off from high school conditioning over the summer. I think good coaches for the high school level are going to space out their conditioning program and try to build kids up so that they're not burning them out July 1, that they're hitting peaks in late August, early September, and then they're maintaining. I would agree that our compressed schedule really hurts in terms of getting kids physically able to play. But just from my rules in Ohio, I can't teach with a ball until August 1st, with the exception of 10 days. So I'm limited to what I can do. So I choose to use my time to make sure they're strong and getting fitter as we go along over the summer. But I think it depends on coach to coach on how they're attacking that and how they're communicating with their club players coming off of that long spring season.
Yeah, Ben, I agree with you. I think it's really important to have communication with your players, if not as coach, just so that way you don't. I mean, there's no nationals this summer or whatever, but if people are going to regionals and stuff like that, you don't want to be burning those kids in your preseason for high school. But I don't know. I was just saying, I coach at Kings Hammer U18 red team, and I give them the same fitness test I would give my varsity team of like 2 miles, just the old Cooper test, like be close to it. And you can say, well, whatever, but it tells me that they're fit enough, or I know they're not fit enough, and I can gauge my practices where we need to go. I'm a big believer that if you're fit, you probably won't get in as much. So I can like limit and game knowing how fit you are. So I know if your kids are going to go to college and play, they're going to have requirements. So I try to hold them to this kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, sorry guys, can everybody hear me again? Hopefully everybody can hear me again. I just went to the office to do this thing, so I won't lose internet coverage. And of course, I've gone to the office and lost internet coverage. So, so yeah, we're just trying to steer towards the positives. Have we gotten there yet? We talked about, I want you guys to start thinking about and plug it in to the chat, like reasons why our kids play each of these sports. Okay. Yes, seeing a lot of good answers. Ultimately, I think when we start talking about kids, is that there's a common thread on why they play both. And Jeremy, if you start seeing some of these guys and throwing out some of the ideas of what they're saying, it'd be great.
For the most part, it looks like club, they're looking to play more for themselves. With high school, they look to be playing with their friends to keep it fun. Chris, you've been around the high school scene for a while. What are some of the positives that you see with your program, and what comes from club?
I'm assuming you're jumping on me when you say me, Chris, right? For Dixie.
Chris Grimm, yeah.
Or not. That's all right. If it's somebody else, I don't mind. I'll jump in just for a second because I've done both for I've done club for about 15 years and high school for about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And like I said, I see a lot of our friends on here doing this. You can't hide the fact that the one thing that I was hoping for from this is to start that dialogue. And I was about to put it in the chat of, do we feel that the coaches, whether you're club or high school or both or whatever, that we are promoting them to want to participate in both? Because that's one of the biggest themes I get from parents all the time on the backside. I mean, especially now, a lot of schools where middle schoolers are allowed to play, like on a freshman team or something. I get that all the time. We are a school where we tell them, hey, you should be going to your club practices, when you're in those years where you could play both during the fall. But there are some, that may not take that approach. And so one of the things I was hoping to create a dialogue, whether you want to go from DA down to high school or, middle school or whatever, is trying to see how many of you all feel like there's a vibe out there of trying to work together, of saying, hey, go to that practice. You're going to learn more at your club practice because you're going to get more attention from those coaches. That is the number one reason I jumped on this, is to see, the vibe out there from all of us, because a lot of us do both. And sorry if that was supposed to be a different Chris, no big deal. I was just trying to add into the conversation.
No,
Can I
that's
ask you a question?
perfectly fine.
Let's expand on that. Any other areas that have that kind of collaboration. I think particularly with the younger kids, eighth graders maybe, just because everyone else is locked into high school. So what about those kind of trap year players, I guess, would be a way to look at that.
Hey, Derek, this is Ben from Fusion. I think one of the things we usually get, it actually comes from the parents. They're worried that if they don't get their foot in the door in 7th and 8th grade, that they may not be able to get a spot on a high school team as they get to their freshman year or their 9th grade year. And there's a lot of worry there. So I don't know if it's necessarily high school coaches and club coaches. I think there's a lot of kind of this peer pressure from the community, from the parents of this worry about not being able to make it at the high school.
I could see that, especially in a lot of our small communities as well. It's, even though I live outside of Lexington, high school is a pretty big deal, so I think a lot of parents, feel like they're pressured a little bit, even though I know for a fact both high school coaches defer to club when they can for their younger kids. So that's very interesting. Anyone else?
I feel the same way. And even on the girls' side, sometimes it's a numbers thing where we need those middle school players to fill in JV rosters. But I definitely feel like there's pressure from those parents. I think you said it perfectly, whoever the person was before that jumped on. There just definitely seems to be pressure in the community where if I don't get high school coaches' eyes on me as a 7th and 8th grader, it's going to be too late by the time I'm a freshman to get involved in the varsity level, even though, like you said, high school coaches seem to kind of really push the club scene for the younger ages, but it definitely seems like a community, I don't know, pressure coming from outside.
Why do you guys think that is? Do you think that is because, they open up I would say open up the newspaper, but that doesn't really happen anymore, right? So they go to, the websites or whatever and see, Lafayette scores in the paper or see their neighbors, scored a goal yesterday. Do you think that might be the case, or what do you think that might be, Taylor?
I don't know. It seems to depend on age groups. Like my personal experience this past year, I had a big group of 7th graders, and they were very talented. They came from a top club and a top level at their club, and it felt like those girls it seems like they're going to be a group coming in as freshmen this year. It really seems like they think, okay, we've been in the JV system now for 2 years. It's going to be natural for us to make varsity as freshmen. And to be honest, it really kind of stressed me as a coach because I don't feel like there are a lot of freshmen who are physically able to come in at the varsity level. And I don't know if they just think they have eyes coming in or if they think I put my time in at JV and now I'm ready. I also don't know if it's as common on the boys' side as it is the girls, but that is definitely something that's growing. And I don't know if it's because we have to fill the rosters with some 8th graders, and those trapped players. That's a big thing too, where a lot of those 8th graders are playing JV because they don't have a club team to play for. And so then I feel like maybe those other girls feel like they're at a disadvantage because they're not. I don't know.
Maybe somebody from the Louisville area or outside of the Lexington, Northern Kentucky area. Anything similar?
Hey, Derek, this is Charlie. Just one quick comment on this. I'll tell you from the club side, parents love school sports. They absolutely love it. I think most parents will tell you, yeah, we think the development's better, playing club, but this is what it's all about. And I think part of that goes back to, when you look at people that are more our age, there wasn't hardly any club growing up. It was just starting out, like in the Louisville area, back in the days when I was playing in high school, Bon Air had just kicked off. Club soccer just wasn't known. So I think a lot of these parents' frame of reference is school was like the biggest thing in the world. So when you look at like pushing the kids younger and younger into JV teams or whatever it is, that might be part of it.
Could it also, yeah, I'm sorry guys, could it also be because based on my experience, I don't know what other programs do. I know a lot of programs might have a fee that they charge. We haven't where I've been at. We're Title I school. Could it be because high school is perceived as cheaper to play?
Yeah, I've thought about that, Jay. One of the things I wonder as well, though, and this is what always would get me is when I was running a club, is we would have kids miss their club practice to go to a middle school or high school practice or something.
Right.
They're not paying, but they're paying for the club. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I'm a cheap dude. If you ask my friends, they know I'm a cheap guy. So like
Yeah.
if I pay something for my kids, they're going to be at that thing I paid for, right? So I don't
Right.
know. That's a good question. What's
I also think, I'm sorry, guys. I also make this point. I also wonder too if there's a little geography involved. Here in Kentucky, at least, we've got so many small communities with one high school. Pretty much from the time those kids are born, the parents cannot wait to put that kid in a whatever their high school uniform is. So if they got the opportunity in 7th grade to do it, they're going to do it.
Yeah, just a thought, guys. But unlike at other, in other places in the world that there's several different sports that are wearing the same jersey, right? So like it's, we'll say Spain, for example, like Barcelona, Real Madrid, how many teams do they have in their club where that becomes the community sense, So, sorry, Brock, you were about to say something. I apologize.
Well, I was just going to tag on what Charlie said. Like when I was growing up, we played club ball only to get better for high school. And I feel like some of that's still the same way. Like we played club ball just to get developed, and it was all to make sure that the high school, junior and senior seasons were successful. And I mean, I see the same thing still with the culture down here.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the community we live in, right? I think that's going to be a big, there's definitely a difference between, outside of Lexington, inside Lexington, up in northern Kentucky, outside, so I think it all depends on your environment. But to kind of keep this moving a little bit, the next question I want to ask here is, why do we as coaches need to take upon ourselves to collaborate with each other, with the high school coaches, club coaches combined? Because I know one of the things I got a lot of was, well, I tried and they never reached back out, so we're not talking anymore, that kind of thing. But I think as we're doing through these coaching education, it's really evolving into more of a leadership role, right? So I think if we're really serious about player development and holistic player development, we need to have these discussions because if you're a high school coach, you have one of your club kids is with another coach for 8 months out of the year. So how can you communicate to help them help the player get better? Vice versa, if you're a teacher in a building and you're a coach, you see your kids pretty much every day, whether you're in season or not. So you might know things that the club coach doesn't know. You might understand that their family's going through a hard time, or they just had a bad breakup, or things that might explain some different behaviors that you might see on the field that as a club coach that we might not see on a day-to-day basis with the hour and a half, 2 hours session. So just a thought there. Okay. Coaches are either the most confident human beings on the planet or the most insecure people on the planet. It doesn't land on too much. So, why collaborate? Why talk to another coach? Well, maybe it helps you out. Maybe there's some approaches that, the coach from the other side might have some ideas, to help you as a coach and vice versa, or how you can help, lead the player and the personalities of the player, things like that. Hey, Jeremy, is there anything popping up on the chat that we need to jump onto?
Well, the chat seems to be going college scholarships and where you really get them. Club versus high school.
That's a very valid question. And actually, a lot of the calls I've been on has involved that question. And as a college coach, well, actually, if you don't mind, I believe we have a couple of college guys on here that are current college coaches. I don't know, Adam, if you might be willing to talk and kind of get your perspective on recruiting, college versus high school. Or maybe even Will, since you're also a college coach.
Thanks, Derek. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Good to see some familiar faces. I think it's been good discussion so far. I think from a recruiting standpoint, when you look at high school, one of the nice aspects is the KHSAA website, the schedules, the statistics, the rosters that are available, and just the easy access to what's going on with those teams and opportunities to go see them play. And then I think, again, with club, we know that the level of soccer being played is better. So maybe a guy that's scoring 25 goals at the high school level against some teams that aren't the most talented, then wouldn't be able to do that at the higher level of club soccer. And so I think there's pros and cons to both. I think it's important to try to see players in both environments when you can.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. You know, and I just saw something on the chat as well. You know, just so you guys understand, especially high school coaches, a lot of the reason why college coaches mostly go to club showcases is because of volume of teams that are there. You know, as a college coach, I could watch 4 fields, you know, in a pretty close proximity and see a lot of players. If I was at a high school game, more often than not, and you know, Adam can disagree with me or agree with me here on this, is that I already know the player I like. I'm not there to evaluate the player. I'm there to see the player and basically be seen by the player sometimes, or maybe I'm there to see how he you know, deals with a pressure environment. You know, if it's like a tournament game or things like that. You know, I don't know if you got anything to add on that, Adam, but or disagree or agree.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the tough parts on the club side right now is it's just a little bit confusing as far as, you know, who is the best team in the area, who's the best team in the state, which league are you playing in. But I think from a general standpoint, you know the level of the club team you're going to watch, and you know then that if that player can compete at that level against the level of competition as well, that they're probably going to be, you know, the right fit for your program as you hoped they would be.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
David, you had an interesting little comment here about inviting college coaches. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So it kind of came from not only trying to give our girls exposure to the college level, but also in competing with the DA. There were a lot of girls that felt like they had to go to the DA to get college exposure. So one thing we did a couple of things to really try to combat that was number one, early on in our preseason practices, we invite college coaches in to watch. A lot of them at that time, they're not able to talk to the girls, but they're able to come there and observe. We put a bio sheet together for them. When I first did this, I asked all the levels of coaches what they would want to see on that bio sheet. It was very interesting. At the D1 level, all they really wanted to see was height. And at the D3 NAIA, they wanted to see all the other extracurriculars, GPA, and all of that stuff. So that was interesting. But it gave our girls some exposure to some college coaches. And last year, we did have some end up playing in college because of that. And then we also utilize Huddle so that our girls can put together, not only on our side for coaching, but for them to put together film to send out to college coaches. So that's been very beneficial as well. I did want to make a comment that the communication and collaboration between high school and club coaches is huge for player development. I've been really fortunate to have some of the club coaches have good ongoing dialogue. Hey, what are you trying to get out of this player? Where do you see this player playing? What can we do to help? Kind of on both sides of the fence so that they can achieve whatever they're looking to achieve, whether it's make the top team in club, get to college, whatever they're trying to achieve, that we're both on the same page to help that happen.
Hey, David, can I follow up with a question? Because that's something that we're going to kind of get into in a little bit. How has that communication been started? Has that been something that's because you've known a lot of these coaches in the area for a long time, or is it something where you've sought, you know, coaches out, or they've sought you out? I mean, how's all that developed?
It's really been a combination of all the above. Some of it is maybe a coach that I know and we just have a conversation about it. Sometimes it is the club coach reaching out. And then other times it's me reaching out to the club coach. It's really been all aspects. And when that happens, it really does benefit the player because it helps them gain developmentally what they want to gain. And then it helps their confidence and helps their play on both the club side and the high school side. So when it does happen right, it's been fantastic.
That's terrific to hear. That's one of the things that I get burned out at is whenever a player shows up to a field and, you know, it's just like, well, it's just whatever. I'm not going to try that hard. I don't care. And that burns me as a player because, you know, as a player, you know, you should be prepared to play, you know, and not already kind of, knocking one thing off, in favor of another. So, just kind of moving on here to keep everything going. Strategies, and Dave, that's a great little segue into, what I want to kind of get out at is, how do you communicate to the other side, as a coach? Now, Dave's done his thing. Is there any other coaches out there who's had some great success, or is there a coach out there that hasn't had a lot of success to try to make some effort into communicating with the other side of things?
Lindsay, speak up on that.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Sorry, I don't mean to like hop into this Kentucky meeting, but I'm really enjoying the conversation, and I figured I'd just add that in there.
Well, Lindsay, you're part of the Kentucky crew, whether you're in Ohio, Maryland, or wherever you may be. You're always going to be around here. So yeah, please expound on what your thoughts are.
Well, I just mentioned for us as a former college coach, I personally and as a staff, we loved going to high school games. For players we were actively recruiting, we wouldn't just go to high school games to find players, but more so those players that were high on our list. We wanted to see what they were like in that environment. If they were hiding in games versus trying to take over games, how they interacted and competed with players and teammates who may not be at their skill set. I remember us crossing players off our list because they just made a mockery of the game. And for us, we're like, we want competitors. We want players who are passionate about the game, regardless of the skill level, regardless of the quality of the competition. So for us specifically, and this is something I actually articulate to high school players all the time, is you can really elevate your game in the high school environment because of the speed of play around you. Maybe you can take more risks. Maybe you can take games over. Maybe you can learn how to bring other people into the game, because perhaps for you, that environment could be a little bit slower compared to your club environment. So it's all a mindset. And again, as a former college coach, we went to high school games to figure out, do we want to take this player on, or do we want to cross this kid off our list?
Yeah, I think that those are great points, Lindsay. Great points. Anyone else got some ideas? One thing I found when I talked to a couple of the high school guys when I was coaching at a club in Louisville is I also found out who was up to taking penalty kicks and who wasn't up to taking penalty kicks. And sometimes in club soccer, we're rarely put in that situation, where in high school soccer, that's a little bit more of a, thing that happens often. So, that was some good, valuable information for me. And at the same time, I had somebody totally choke, said they were really good. So I had to give that high school coach a little bit of hell about it. But anyway, other thoughts?
Hey, one thing I'll throw in as well, on the high school side, and I'm certainly not, I don't think I haven't met many people on this panel, so I'm certainly not accusing anybody. But on the high school side, one thing that I noticed for my team last fall at Fairdale, we had the number one strength of schedule in our region, and we went out of our comfort zone a lot. And I think that when you add in that and playing other schools that have club players and club coaches working for them, you go to tournaments and everything. We've got to do a better job scheduling more competitively. I'm not saying more games. I'm saying that in the 16, 17 games 15 games, whatever it is that we have, those need to be competitive matches. And some programs may not be able to help it based on where they're at, but you look on the scoreboards and there's way too many 8-0s, 9-0s, 10-0s. And if a college coach does happen to come to one of those games, how much did they really learn, and how much did they really see from our kids?
Yeah, I think, I had a bunch of notes written down on a slide deck to share, and that was one of the things I had was that, as high school, sometimes that's based on geography versus, just scheduling in general, right? So, that can always be an issue with high school, whereas clubs sometimes, if they're in a certain league, it's a little bit more balanced schedule. But at the same time, there's a lot of that we can control as a high school coach. Dan, were you about to say something there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Derek, thanks. Dan Ensley from Kings Hammer Bluegrass. Excellent conversation. It's great to see everyone. And being a year new to the environment here in Lexington and to Kentucky, it's really great to see the collaborative effort, being attempted here and starting going forward. I came from a club in Virginia, so I've coached college for 18 years, but a couple things that I think that are really important that will be helpful is for, one, as the general manager for my club, the more high school coaches that I have working within my club system allows there to be some continuity in some of the types of things that we're talking about and consistency. I also think that being able to pull back the curtain and allowing access for high school coaches to be on club sidelines or club coaches to be in high school sidelines, kind of watching training and kind of seeing the things that happen, it's important that everyone understands how to walk in the other's shoes, right? I think one of the big disconnects that happen is a club coach doesn't understand how difficult it is for a high school coach to put a team together in a 3-month season and not have real training sessions because they're having 2 or 3 games a week and they're having to manage a roster of 26 players, many of which are crossing like 3 or 4 different levels of talent and ability. So if you've ever had to manage that type of group, it's a lot different than having a club team that's already been separated by levels of play and having 3 days a week of practice and 1 game on the weekend where you can get deep into topics of tactics and team building and really understanding functional and team positioning and all those things. So because of those challenges that each coach faces, there's still benefits for that player to be partaking in both systems. Right? I think players that get a chance to play high school, maybe they get to play a different position. Maybe they get to take risks. Maybe they get to do things that are different and more aggressive than they would with their club team. Right? Likewise, on the club level, players get a detailed understanding of what it means to be an outside back, what it means to be a holding midfielder versus playing 3 positions because you're the most athletic and most impactful player on your high school team. So both systems have a great advantage. I just don't think that coaches spend enough time understanding what it's like to be in the other's shoes. And if we could find that medium ground, and what we're doing at Bluegrass is, our coaching education is open for all high school coaches who want to participate in what we're doing. And if they're going to have something or host something and they want coaches to come and participate, we'll be happy to show up and do that. I think it's a great way to kind of get the conversation started. And we also are a club that, we want players to know about who we are and what we're doing. So if there is an interested high school player that's not attached to a club and they're looking at getting a certain experience, there's value in that as well. But I think those are the real challenges that face everywhere, and we have to solve that to be able to get going forward.
Yeah, I think great points, Dan. One of the things that I was thinking about, and Will, I'll let you jump on here in just a sec, is that it's good for club coaches to be really knowledgeable about the high school coaches in the area because they could provide some players that you might not know about or move in, things like that. Will, what were you about to jump in and say?
First off, I think, obviously I think this is a great discussion. You look at, there's almost 40 people on here, especially from the high school side of things. I think it's great to see more and more people. I've been fortunate to work in the college game for 10 years now. I've been a head coach. I've been a full-time assistant. I've been a graduate assistant. I've worked men's. I've worked women's. I've been in Kentucky. I've been in Iowa. I've been in South Carolina, and I've been NAI Division III and Division II. It's different everywhere. It is different everywhere. When I was in South Carolina and when I was in Iowa, high school soccer was in the spring, so I went to more high school games. I've been in places to where we had to train at 6 or 7, 7:38 at night, so I wasn't able to make many high school games. Or what was the schedule like on the night that I did have open? Maybe it was a recovery session, so I was able to get out, but I would have to travel, an hour and a half to get to a decent game. It was tough to do. I think from a high school standpoint, I think coaches are getting better and better and better. But if you want to be a high school coach that helps kids get along, you've got to be proactive. And I've had coaches, I still have high school coaches in Kentucky and other places that just hammer me with kids, and it's great. And they're the same coaches that I'll call and say, hey, when you guys play this team, let me know about this kid as well. And they'll do it because, they're in it for the betterment of the game. They're in it for all the right reasons. And so I think, I think from the high school standpoint, for me as a collegiate coach, right, just being proactive, because there are some high school coaches that don't necessarily return phone calls or emails as well as others do. And from a club standpoint, there's a lot more. I think there's a lot more connections, and people have a lot more connections through the club than the high school thing. So from a high school standpoint, if you're a high school coach and you want to help your kids, be proactive, and you'll find that coaches will listen to what you have to say, especially if you do a good job providing them with with kids or good information, or if you're giving them an honest feedback of a kid and they come to you and the kid is exactly who they say it is.
Thanks, Will. Brilliant. Jeremy, I think there's a question or something you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, Jeremy, you want to speak up on your curiosity here? Maybe.
Well, we'll kind of move on. If Jeremy doesn't want to talk up, we can. Just things that, just some thought processes as we're talking to each other is one, first, I feel like it's important that you actually reach out to get to know the other coach. I think a lot of times if you just kind of lead in with, hey, I'm so-and-so, tell me what you're doing with this player, that can come off a little bit negative. Chris Graham, I don't know if you're still on the call. If you are, can you kind of tell us what you wrote down in the survey about what do you do for all the club coaches for games and such?
What specifically are you talking about, Derek? Sorry.
I think I remember on the survey you kind of put something that you let all the club coaches come into games, put you on the pass list. Is that correct?
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, I'm always happy to do that. Anytime club guys want to come, either watch their players or maybe we talk to a lot of club coaches about kids that we've never heard of that just show up at tryouts, and haven't been there all summer for any of our summer practices or anything. Maybe they come from low income families or they just moved into the area or something. And, so we start to reach out like as soon as we can and like, hey, we need to find a place for this kid because he's got some potential. He loves to play, whatever it is, he just wants to be involved. And so, we'll reach out to club guys and say, hey, come out to practices, come out to games, whatever it is, just to, get them to be seen and get some exposure so they can find some place to play outside of high school, because high school season is so short. So, obviously the kids that really love to play, they want to play year round, if they can.
No, that's great. Yeah. I know. And Chris, Chris coaches at Lafayette. He has done some club before. Chris is one of his favorite weekends, the State Cup weekend, because we always see Chris in his lawn chair watching all his kids every tournament, whether he's coaching or not. But I think that's important because all the club coaches know that Chris is out there to help his kids and wants to keep up with what they're doing. So how can you as a coach do that? Think about ways to support the other coach. I think if you come in and say, hey, you're playing this player in the wrong position, he plays this for me, she plays this for me, how would that come off to you in the other way? I think that's important. Make sure as you guys go through and you talk to your players, I've heard some club coaches in the past kind of down high school soccer to some of their kids. What if that's really an important experience to that kid? What's that going to put you in their frame of mind? So that's something you want to make sure that they're staying motivated, and you don't want to down an experience that kids really enjoy, right? You want to make sure that they're motivated to play. Let them play, and make sure that they're good there. So some other things. Jeremy Howard, you want to jump in and say what you were asking a little bit ago?
Yeah, sorry, I was having some mic issues there. No, I think that it was touched on too, is that are players exclusive to just club or exclusive to just high school, or is it more the fact that a lot of these high school players can be identified and then pushed onto club, and then maybe even vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could work both ways, right? So if I'm a club coach and I know this kid is, I'm playing for my club, play the high school, maybe I'm communicating to you, say, hey, Jeremy, you got a player coming, and kind of let them know. And like Chris Grimm was saying, there's some kids, especially in the metropolitan areas, that club coaches might not know because these kids can't afford to play club soccer. Or they need help to play club soccer. So they might just show up and boom, we've got a player all of a sudden. So just thoughts there. But guys, we're getting close to an hour, so just want to kind of start looking to wrap this up. And this has been terrific. I want you guys to think about different ways to try have strategies, but most importantly, I want you guys, when we leave here, is to start developing an action plan. What can you do? What are you going to do? To try to help your players. One of the common things I saw in that little survey, they didn't have everybody on there, but it was, I don't have time to talk to all these coaches. Just a thought, but for those of you who've got any kind of background in technology, maybe you throw in a Google form for all your kids as they're jumping in, and that has that kind of info on it. I'm a big mail merge guy, so maybe I can take that spreadsheet up an email, kind of like how I sent you guys something today, even though I totally screwed that up earlier, but sorry about that. But maybe you just send out an email to all the kids' club coaches that they've populated and just ask them, hey, this is my name, this is who I am, this is who I coach, what can you tell me, can you help, you're welcome to come to this, things like that. You're also going to get resistance to this for certain coaches. Does that mean that you stop trying to help your player by communicating with them? That's something to think about. So anything out there in closing, questions or anything like that? So, I just want to say thank you to everybody that jumped on the call. Really appreciate all your time. I'm going to take this off record shortly. And then, if you guys want to hang around and chat a little bit longer, you're welcome to. If you want to ask some questions off camera, you're welcome to. But once again, thanks for joining us. And Jeremy, thanks for helping moderate the chat room.